Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. For context, my husband serves as an active duty Navy SEAL. He just returned from a 6-month deployment overseas about 3 weeks before we moved in. Anyone who knows military life understands that reintegration is already challenging enough without additional stress. I'd been so excited to start our new chapter in this community while he continued his training at the nearby base. We knew the community had an HOA with strict rules, everything from approved paint colors to landscaping guidelines, but we'd dealt with HOAs before and figured we could handle it. What we didn't know was that our HOA president was basically running the place like her personal fiefdom. I should have picked up on the red flags during our first homeowners meeting. The HOA president, I'll call her the president, dominated the entire discussion, interrupting other board members and dismissing residents' concerns with a wave of her hand. When someone questioned the recent increase in HOA fees, she shut them down immediately with a comment about supporting our community's premium status. Everyone just nodded along. The incident that changed everything happened about 2 months after we moved in. My husband had been at a late training session and was returning home around 11:30 p.m. He'd left in such a hurry that morning that he forgot his gate pass. Rather than call me to bring it down, he didn't want to wake me. He parked outside the community entrance and decided to walk to our house. It was pouring rain that night. He was wearing his dark navy raincoat with the hood up, taking a shortcut through the community's central green space to reach our street faster. Nothing unusual, right? Wrong. I was half asleep when I heard shouting outside. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I distinctly heard someone yell, "Get on the ground now!" I rushed to our front window and what I saw made my blood run cold. My husband was face down in the mud with a security guard standing over him, gun drawn and pointed directly at his back. Another guard stood nearby, hand on his holster. I grabbed a robe and ran outside barefoot. "What are you doing?" I shouted as I approached. "That's my husband. He lives here." The guard with the drawn weapon, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a buzz cut who I would later learn was the head of security, didn't even glance my way. "Ma'am, stay back. We've apprehended a suspicious individual trespassing on private property." "He's not trespassing. We live at 405. I tried to move closer, but the second guard physically blocked my path. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your residence while we handle this situation," he said firmly. My husband remained perfectly still on the ground, rain soaking through his clothes. "I've identified myself as a resident," he said calmly. "I've shown my military ID. I've told you my address and my wife's name. There's no need for weapons." The head guard snorted. "Yeah, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. We've had reports of break-ins recently. Not taking any chances." By this point, neighbors had begun to emerge from their homes, watching from their porches. I recognized our next-door neighbor among them and called out, "Please tell them we live here." She hesitantly stepped forward. "They moved in 2 months ago. That's definitely her husband." The guard still didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he spoke into his radio. "We've got a situation at the Central Green. Possible trespasser. Request police backup." I couldn't believe what was happening. "Are you serious? Multiple people have just confirmed he lives here." About 15 minutes later, which felt like hours, police cruisers pulled up with their lights flashing. By this time, my husband was soaked through and still being held at gunpoint. The officers quickly assessed the situation, and after checking my husband's ID and confirming with me, they immediately recognized the overreaction. "Sir, you can stand up now," one officer said to my husband, who slowly rose to his feet with the deliberate movements I recognized from his training, designed not to spook someone with a weapon. The head guard finally holstered his gun, but instead of apologizing, he launched into a justification. He was cutting through the green space after hours, wearing dark clothing, hood up, textbook suspicious behavior. The officer looked unimpressed, and once he identified himself as a resident? "Can't be too careful," the guard replied with a shrug. "That's what we're paid for." Just then, a luxury SUV pulled up and out stepped the HOA president, wrapped in what appeared to be a silk robe. Despite the late hour, her makeup was flawless and her hair perfectly styled. She marched over like she was heading into a boardroom meeting. "What's happening here?" she demanded. The head guard straightened his posture. "Ma'am, we intercepted this individual taking an unauthorized shortcut through the green space after hours." She looked my husband up and down with obvious disdain. "Well, if you'd followed community guidelines and used proper entrances, this wouldn't have happened. Security is just doing their job protecting our residents." I was so angry I could barely speak. "Their job includes pointing guns at residents who are simply walking home?" She gave me a tight smile. "Perhaps you should better acquaint yourselves with our community regulations. Section 12 clearly states that common areas are closed after 10 p.m. My husband, still dripping wet, spoke with remarkable composure. "Ma'am, I understand the need for security, but drawing a weapon should be an absolute last resort, especially when the individual has identified himself and presents no threat. The president's smile didn't waver. Our security team has full discretion to handle suspicious circumstances as they see fit. We take safety very seriously here. The police officers, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, suggested everyone return to their homes and deal with any complaints through proper channels. As we walked back to our house, I noticed the head guard and the president having what appeared to be a friendly, familiar conversation. The next morning, I found a violation notice in our mailbox citing us for interference with security operations with a $500 fine. I was furious. "This is absolutely ridiculous," I told my husband as I waved the notice. "They point a gun at you for walking home. And somehow we're the ones being penalized?" My husband, who was making coffee in our kitchen, seemed troubled but calm. "Something's not right with that security team. The way that guard approached me, it wasn't professional. Anyone with proper training would have identified themselves first and escalated only if necessary." I nodded, already thinking like the lawyer I am, I'm going to contest this fine and raise hell at the next HOA meeting. My husband touched my arm. "I didn't sleep last night," he admitted quietly. "Kept checking the doors, the windows. That's not a good sign." That statement hit me hard. My husband had faced actual combat situations, yet this incident in our supposedly safe community had triggered his hypervigilance. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a power-tripping HOA president or an overzealous security guard. This was about our fundamental right to feel safe in our own home. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I started doing some digging. I reached out to a few neighbors who seemed sympathetic during the incident. Most were reluctant to talk at first, but eventually, one elderly gentleman opened up. "I had a similar run-in with security last month," he told me over his fence. "Nothing as serious as what happened to your husband, but they threatened to report me for walking my dog 5 minutes after the common area closed. When I complained to the board, suddenly I was getting citations for everything. My mailbox height, my garden hose being visible, you name it." This matched what I'd begun to suspect. The security team and the HOA leadership were using intimidation to maintain control. But why such extreme measures in a residential community? I decided to look into the security company itself. Using my legal background, I accessed public records about their licensing and certification. What I found was troubling. The company had only been in business for 18 months, their insurance coverage was minimal, and they didn't appear to have the proper state licensing for armed security personnel. My husband, meanwhile, had spoken with his commanding officer about the incident. His CO was livid about a weapon being pointed at one of his men without justification and offered to support us however he could. "The unit's behind you," my husband told me. "My CO said this isn't just a personal issue. It's about a civilian contractor potentially endangering military personnel." The day before the HOA meeting, I made one more discovery that put everything into focus. While reviewing the HOA financial disclosures, which they're legally required to provide upon request, though they didn't make it easy, I noticed that the security contract had been awarded without a competitive bidding process. A bit more research revealed why. The security company was owned by the president's brother-in-law. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse. Nearly every seat was filled. Word had gotten around about what happened to my husband, and people were curious. The president seemed surprised by the turnout but maintained her composure as she called the meeting to order. When they reached the open forum portion of the agenda, I raised my hand immediately. The president acknowledged me with obvious reluctance. "I'd like to address an incident that occurred last week involving your security team holding my husband at gunpoint for walking home," I began, keeping my voice steady despite my anger. "We've been issued a $500 fine for interference, which we're contesting." The president cut in. "This has already been addressed with you privately. Security personnel observed suspicious behavior and followed protocols." "Pointing weapons at identified residents is protocol?" I asked. "Our head of security made a judgment call based on the situation," she replied dismissively. "If your husband had been using proper entrances and carrying his resident ID, there wouldn't have been an issue." I took a deep breath. "I've reviewed your security contract and the qualifications of your team. Are you aware that your security company doesn't possess the proper state licensing for armed guards?" A murmur went through the room. The president's expression hardened. "Our security arrangements have been approved by the board," she said firmly. "Without competitive bidding, which violates your own bylaws," I countered, "and without disclosing that the company is owned by your brother-in-law, which represents a clear conflict of interest." The room erupted in conversation. One of the other board members, looking alarmed, whispered something to the president, who waved him off impatiently. "These are baseless accusations," she declared. "And frankly, this hostile attitude doesn't bode well for your future in this community." It was exactly the opening I needed. Is that a threat? I asked, because I should mention that I've already filed a formal complaint with the State Regulatory Board for Private Security Companies. I've also prepared documentation for the police department regarding unlicensed armed guards operating in our community. The color drained from her face, but she quickly recovered. We can discuss this matter in private after the meeting. Actually, came a voice from the back of the room, I think we should discuss it now. It was the elderly neighbor who had spoken to me earlier. He stood up, leaning on his cane. I've lived here for 15 years, and I've never felt unsafe until this new security team arrived. I've been harassed, intimidated, and fined for ridiculous violations. Another resident stood up. They followed my teenage daughter home from the bus stop last week. Followed her, called it a security escort. She was terrified. Suddenly, people were sharing stories all around the room. Security guards peering into windows during property inspections, excessive citations following complaints, late-night security checks that seemed designed to intimidate. The president tried repeatedly to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. The dam had broken. I stood up again. I've spoken with several residents who've had similar experiences. We're prepared to file a class action lawsuit against both the HOA and the security company for harassment, intimidation, and violation of homeowner rights. One of the other board members, a woman who had been quiet until now, cleared her throat. I think we need to suspend our security contract pending review. I've had concerns for months but was overruled. She looked pointedly at the president. The president's face was a mask of fury. You don't have the authority. Actually, the board member interrupted, as treasurer, I do have the authority to freeze payments on contracts that may violate our fiduciary responsibility, especially ones that expose us to significant legal liability. 2 days later, state investigators arrived to review the security company's operations. They immediately suspended the company's ability to provide armed security services in our community, citing multiple licensing violations. An emergency HOA board meeting was called, where the president faced a no-confidence vote from her fellow board members. What really sealed her fate was the financial audit that followed, which revealed she had been receiving kickbacks from her brother-in-law's security company. The premium we were paying for security was largely going into their pockets. The president was removed from the board, and the security contract was terminated. The head guard, who I later learned had been dismissed from his previous law enforcement position for excessive force, was now under investigation himself. In the aftermath, something unexpected happened. The remaining board members asked my husband if he would be willing to consult on new security measures for the community. We need someone with actual expertise, the treasurer told him, not someone playing soldier with a sidearm. My husband agreed, on the condition that any new security team would undergo proper training and certification. His commanding officer even arranged for his unit to provide a free security assessment as a community service project. As for me, I was asked to join the HOA board to help revise the community bylaws and ensure legal compliance going forward. I accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to transform a toxic situation into something positive. The $500 fine was not only dismissed, but the new board issued a formal apology to us and to other residents who had been unfairly targeted. More importantly, we established a resident oversight committee for security operations to ensure accountability. It's been 6 months since that rainy night. Our community feels different now. Neighbors talk to each other, watch out for each other. We've implemented reasonable security measures that protect without intimidating. Last week, the elderly neighbor who stood up at that fateful meeting stopped by with homemade cookies. You know, he said, I was thinking of selling my house before all this happened. Couldn't stand the stress anymore. Now I'm glad I stayed. That's when I realized what we'd really accomplished. It wasn't just about taking down a corrupt HOA president or a dangerous security guard. It was about reclaiming our community and making it truly safe, not through intimidation and force, but through accountability, expertise, and mutual respect. Sometimes I think about how differently things might have turned out if my husband hadn't been trained to remain calm with a weapon pointed at him, or if I hadn't had the legal knowledge to challenge what was happening. Not everyone has those advantages, which makes me all the more determined to use mine to stand up for what's right. The president and her brother-in-law are now facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The head security guard lost his license to work in private security. And our house? It finally feels like the home we dreamed of when we first moved in. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting everyone around you too. That night in the rain could have ended very differently, but instead, it became the catalyst for positive change that benefited our entire community. The next one is entitled People Story. My first car in my name was an '87 Ford Escort. It was not in great shape, and I never actually got to drive it on the road. I was a late bloomer in getting my driver's license. I didn't get it till I was 27, so my real first car as a driver was a 1993 Toyota Camry. But back then when I was around 19, I saw the Escort for sale outside of a mechanic shop for $300. My parents thought it was a good deal too, so I decided I was going to buy it. The moment my sister found out I was going to buy that car, she cried and claimed she'd wanted it, but she already had a running and driving car at the time, and couldn't really afford to buy the Escort anyway. My sister was crying about wanting the Escort, because her first car was a blue '89 Ford Escort when she was 16. She went out of her way to buy it without permission from our parents. She was riding with our great-grandfather, saw the car for sale on the side of the road, stopped to look at it, and then bought it. Not only did our parents have to register the car in their names for her, they also had to help with insurance. The clutch also went bad in that car almost right away. My parents had to drop $900 to get that car fixed. And that's with a discount on the parts our mother bought through her connections. And what did my sister do? She abused the hell out of that poor car. She drove it like a maverick, smoked in it when she was still underage to have cigarettes, and filled it with trash. Then she got in a minor accident and messed up the front end by driving into a pole or something. Then sometime after that, the car got impounded and she didn't bother to try and get it back. So the impound lot probably sold it as junk. I have no idea if my parents had to pay the impound lot for the unpaid fees either. They never told me, but it'd just be more money my sister cost them. Back to me buying the '87 Ford Escort, and my sister was bitter. She was jobless and relying off her nasty boyfriend at the time. He was the guy she dated before meeting the guy she married, and later divorced. Her ex-husband was the best thing to ever happen to her. But she messed up that marriage. Though that's not what this is about. Anyway, she couldn't buy the car, and I did, but she seemed to get over it. Seemed being the word. She kept pointing out I didn't have the skills for a manual transmission. Remarked her Escort was newer than mine. Said I was copying her for getting the same car, just like I copied her by being gifted a Game Boy in the '90s a year after she got a Game Boy. And she even went out of her way to point out many of the car's faults. Which admittedly there were many. But it was my first car. I tried to at least fix it up. The mechanic shop I bought it from swapped out the heater core for cheap, and it ended up being used as a farm vehicle for hauling stuff instead of a road vehicle, until it was eventually sold for scrap. Also, there was another Escort of the same model for sale locally for the same price I got mine, and my sister didn't even try to buy it. Then one day I walked into a discount store, and looked at the stuff in their auto section, and they had a seat cover with glow-in-the-dark skulls in the pile for pretty cheap. Can't remember how cheap. $5 to $10 maybe. But I liked it, so I bought it. When I brought it home, I showed it to my sister before putting it in the Escort, and suddenly she started grabbing at the box the seat cover was in and saying, "Oh, you bought me a seat cover." She gleefully wrenched it from my hands, and started to leave with it, but then paused when she took a closer look at it, then turned around and tossed it back to me because she thought it was ugly since it had skulls on it. She even looked bitter and said she didn't want it before huffing off. Later she tried to say it was all a joke, and that she wasn't actually trying to take it, and she stuck to that story. But I know my sister. That was another one of her attempts at a power move. She was definitely trying to take it away. Probably just to see what I'd do to get it back. And I wouldn't be surprised if she did it because I bought the Escort she wanted. That's just the sort of petty person she is. She's also been through more cars than she can even remember. Counting back, she went through like 7 cars in 10 years. The next one is entitled People Story. For background, I, F28, have been working for a bank as a processor for the last 10 years, and while I know I'm lucky to have my job, my working pattern is good and I have the option to work from home. The job itself is boring and can be stressful, and it's not what I want to do with my life. I could never decide what I wanted to do when I was younger, and instead of going to college, I decided to work and gain experience for maybe a year or so until I could make my mind up before returning to higher education. But I got too used to making money and never did. Fast forward 10 years and I've come to the conclusion that what I would like to do is write books full-time. I have been writing and self-publishing for a few years now. However, I would like to be able to dedicate more time to it, but up until now that's never been an option. My husband, M30, was promoted almost 2 years ago now and is literally doing his dream job. He makes far more than I do but not quite enough to completely support us just yet. But recently he took me aside and said he knew I wasn't happy in my job, and it was hurting him to see. He suggested that instead of working a 40-hour week, I reduce my hours and maybe do 25 instead, as we can easily afford it. I was completely over the moon at the suggestion, and agreed. Work were also happy to accommodate due to my length service. My sister, F24, on the other hand, was not so happy about my decision. My sister and her husband, M27, both work full-time hours and have 2 young children. My sister has accused me of being lazy and saying that I shouldn't be taking less hours unless I have children, in order to do something that's just a hobby. She says that even she has to work full-time in order to raise her children and that me not feeling like working isn't an excuse to sit around the house and do nothing all day, while my husband is out making money. I've told her that I've worked non-stop since I was 18 years old and now finally know what I want to do with my life, which got me the response that if I took more initiative to find out before now, I could have been doing what I love professionally for years instead of just starting out. This is where I think I might have been an asshole, but I basically told my sister that while I could sympathize with the fact she has a lot on her plate, it's not my fault that she has children and I don't. At this point she raged at me, saying I'm clearly too irresponsible to understand the sacrifice and dedication it takes to have one child, never mind two, and that if I want to be a part-time worker and write silly love stories then I can go do that. I've spoken to my parents and while they don't think I'm in the wrong, they say I should be more understanding of why me and my husband being in a better financial position is a sore spot. Update: I didn't think I was going to write an update to this at all, but I got a few messages and requests for an update, so here we are. My sister and her husband came by today as promised. They actually came over much earlier than I was anticipating and left a couple of hours ago. So I don't know if I managed to say everything I probably should have at the time, but here's the gist for those of you who wanted to know. It didn't take a genius to see that my sister wasn't doing too well. She normally takes pride in her appearance and how she dresses, while I'm usually the one to prioritize sleep over putting on a full face of makeup. But when she turned up this morning she looked as if she hadn't slept in days. She had no makeup on and she was just wearing some loungewear. Not overly important details except that she didn't look like my sister at all. She immediately apologized as soon as she walked into the living room and hugged me before I could say anything. I hugged her back, because she's my little sister and no matter what, I love her to death. It also occurred to me that it felt as if she's lost a ton of weight and while she's always been slim, this worried me a bit and any residual annoyance I might have felt dwindled quite quickly. A lot of you guessed that my sister is pregnant with baby number 3. I'm sorry to disappoint, but this turned out not to be the case. As it turns out, my nephew, M4, her eldest son, has been diagnosed with autism and has been having some major behavioral problems as of late. He's always been a rambunctious kid and prone to a tantrum, but I put this down to him being a child and didn't think too much of it. Apparently he's been having huge meltdowns at nursery school, leading to him being violent with other kids and members of staff, and it's led to my sister having to leave early from work on very short notice and has had to call in sick several times when he's in a bad way. Due to this, she's been called into a disciplinary meeting which might lead to a formal hearing, and it's really worrying her. She's also incredibly worried about what her son's life is going to look like and how much support he'll need moving forward. Her husband is there for her, of course, but he works a job where he needs to drive hours away at a time, so isn't always at home in the mornings when things are at their worst. His mother lives alone in another part of the country, and our parents aren't able to do a whole lot of babysitting as our mother still works and our dad has bad problems with his back. She acknowledges that her behavior was totally uncalled for, but that hearing about me being in a position to be able to cut my hours when she's worrying about even having a job in a couple of weeks really triggered her, and that she's been on medication for her mood for several weeks now as it is. I told her that of course I understood how her position could be stressful and upsetting, but if she had trusted me with this info and confided in me as a sister, of course I would have been there for her in any way I could have. Her husband cut in at this point and assured me that they were both incredibly grateful for every time I and my own husband had helped them out over the years, and he didn't want this to be something that caused our families to drift apart. My sister agreed and again she acknowledged her mistake and admitted that she feels like recently things have been really difficult for her while my life seems to be falling into place. She said that even when I was at my lowest, I still did everything with an air of confidence that she has always lacked, and that even when I didn't know where my life was going I always held my head high and saw the positives, something she is really struggling to do right now. She also told me that she told our parents about speaking to a doctor and being on medication for depression, but had asked them not to say anything to anyone, which is probably why they wanted me to go easy on her. Overall, I'm not mad anymore and I know that deep down my sister is happy for me. She's just in an uncertain situation right now and it got the best of her. The next one is entitled People Story. This happened before my grandma passed this year. For context, I've moved 2 times in a lapse of a few months. The first time I moved with my cousin Mia and our grandma because Mia's father, the sort, brought the woman he cheated on my aunt with while she was undergoing chemotherapy to live in my aunt's house in less than 6 months after she passed. Yes, that's my aunt's house, not his. The sort didn't even pay 1 brick, but he has got the house because my aunt passed, and if Mia doesn't go ahead with the succession of the title, I've heard it costs more than 1 million ARS, she can do nothing about it since the sort hid the deeds from her, so she also has to sue him for them in all case. She practically lived a few weeks at her boyfriend's place, but his whole family actually hates her, so she ended up moving in with me. She had a huge argument with her dad before leaving the house. I took our grandma with us because I was the one taking care of her full time since my aunt passed, and didn't want my mom to assume that responsibility. I also mistakenly had the expectation that Mia was going to help me take care of her since we were living together. I was able to move that quickly because of a regular client of the store I worked at back then. A 60-year-old woman whose son passed a year ago at that moment, heard I wanted to move and was willing to rent me her son's abandoned house at an incredible price. I just had to clean the house, help her pack her son's stuff and trim the abandoned garden. The rental was informal, without any contract. I know it's illegal and risky, but I did it impulsively, and surprisingly it turned out well because we're currently involving a contract so I can buy the house by installments, and my mother and stepdad are willing to help me to pay for it. But it's something that takes time and it's not relevant here. I'm just getting ahead of some questions and comments because I know that moving usually takes more time and involves paperwork. This situation was just a great stroke of luck because this woman and I became very close, and she only wanted to get rid of her son's house because it was too painful for her to keep it. Well, we moved once we cleaned the house. Yes, as you can imagine, Mia barely helped me to clean and took our grandma with us. It didn't take long because the house was in good condition despite being abandoned. It was just dirty and the grass was very long. I used a part of my savings until I got a new job in that city, and since the rent was pretty low cost I didn't really have a problem with paying for most of our bills and expenses. The problem started when Mia started bringing her boyfriend more and more often, to the point that he would stay with us for more than a week, which wouldn't have been a problem if only the guy brought money to buy his own food or pay for his part of the consuming. The guy even had the audacity to want to charge us for gas the few times he drove us both in his car. Every single time I asked Mia to please tell him to somehow contribute if he was staying with us, she started crying about how alone she felt, how the whole world seemed to be against her and how she couldn't take it anymore. It got worse once she wasted up all her savings and started neglecting our grandmother when it was her turn to take care of her. Once I even came home to find out our grandma hadn't even had lunch. This one was the last straw for me. I told her to find a job, otherwise I was kicking her out. This happened after the almost a baby story. My mom wasn't supporting Mia in this one because I threatened her with to cut her out of my life if she intervened again to defend her. This triggered a mental breakdown in Mia, who started ranting about how unbearable our grandma was, how I always have been her favorite granddaughter while she was neglected by her, and how our grandma was practically a stranger for her, so she couldn't care less about what happened or not to her. Our grandmother practically raised us both, and she never liked how my aunt, uncle and Mia made fun of me when I was little, so she naturally stood up for me. Mia wasn't exactly her favorite granddaughter also because she was always capricious and selfish, but our grandma never neglected her at all. She even paid for her 15s, bought her one of her expensive dogs, a French bulldog. She always gave her gifts on important dates and was affectionate with her. In fact, Mia was the distant one here. She never liked our grandma at all, but she would complain about her unfair favoritism every time she saw her spending time with me. This attitude of her always hurt my grandma. I have to admit I lost it here and, without sugarcoating it, I would have left her visually unrecognizable if her boyfriend hadn't intervened. We had a huge fight and even with that I didn't kick her out. But it didn't take long for them to leave because her boyfriend didn't like the house and she didn't want to get a job anyway. So she just moved back with her dad and his new girlfriend and took her good-for-nothing boyfriend with her. A few weeks after Mia left, our grandma was admitted to the hospital and passed a few days later. My mom was taking care of her in that moment. The same night my grandma passed, with my mom crying next to me, Mia yelled at me demanding the house keys so she could take the stuff she had left there. So I gave them to her just because in that moment I only wanted her out of my sight. Well, silly me, because she stole more than $400 worth of items, including our grandma's blood pressure monitor. I didn't report her to the police because my mother asked me not to do it, and the police wouldn't have helped at all anyway. Argentina, lol. If I hadn't been in shock at that moment because of my grandma's death and my mom hadn't been next to me having a mental breakdown, I probably would have ended Mia's life right there in the hospital. Now she's selling her dead mother's jewelry and the stuff she stole us to afford food for her and her boyfriend instead of getting a job. And he still charges her for gas every time he takes her somewhere. She also tells everyone a sad story of how her whole family disowned her because she was depressed and needed some help. The worst part is she could have just got a job, saved up to pay for the lawsuit and sue her father for the stolen deeds, because we were willing to help her with that. But Mia wasn't willing to work, and she squandered all the money she had at McDonald's. So yeah, God gives food to the anorexic. I moved again in less than 1 month after my grandma passed. Now I'm living with roommates in a city that is more than 4 hours away from my hometown, just looking for peace and new friends. Mia is blocked from everywhere, so I hope not to hear anything from her again. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.